Welcome to Epic Audio Adventures, where the night reveals its mysteries. This evening, we embark on a journey into the fog-draped English countryside of late 1934, where Ivy Manor, a magnificent Victorian estate enshrouded in ivy and intrigue, awaits. This narrative pays homage to the legendary Agatha Christie, the unmatched queen of detective fiction. Hercule Poirot, the keen-eyed Belgian sleuth, alongside his loyal companion Captain Hastings, has arrived to investigate the disappearance of a silver cigarette case. However, when a gunshot disrupts the manor's tranquility, their inquiry takes a perilous turn. Join us in unraveling the enigma of Ivy Manor, where shadows hide secrets and reality shifts amid falsehoods. Before we proceed, we invite you to share your location. It connects you to our nighttime story. Now, let the enigma commence. Chapter 1: Arrival at Ivy Manor. Poirot enters a realm of mysteries. The English countryside unfolded before us as the motorcar navigated the winding roads, hedges lining both sides like quiet guardians. It was late autumn, and the air carried a briskness indicative of winter's arrival. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat next to my old companion, Hercule Poirot, who was, as always, impeccably attired in a dark suit, his mustache styled to perfection. His keen, feline-like eyes scanned our surroundings, absorbing every detail. Our destination was Ivy Manor, a distinguished Victorian estate deep in the countryside. The invitation had been extended by its proprietor, Mr. Charles Montague, a man of some standing, though I admittedly knew little about him aside from his reputation for entertaining lavishly. Poirot had been called to look into the case of a missing silver cigarette case, a seemingly trivial issue. Yet, as I had come to understand during my years with Poirot, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Poirot, I interjected, breaking the comfortable silence, this appears quite beneath your skills. A missing cigarette case, surely the local police can manage that. Poirot turned to me, his eyes sparkling with that familiar gleam. Ah, mon ami, you underestimate the intricacies of human behavior. A theft, no matter how minor, often reveals a much larger narrative. Moreover, the urgency from our host is particularly intriguing. I suspect there is more to this than is apparent. I nodded, although I remained skeptical. Still, I had faith in Poirot's instincts. If he sensed something was amiss, it likely was. Finally, the motorcar veered onto a lengthy gravel driveway, and Ivy Manor emerged in sight. It was an imposing edifice, its stone exterior cloaked in thick ivy that clung to every crevice. Tall chimneys jutted from the roof, their outlines stark against the gloomy sky. The gardens, though carefully tended, were enveloped in a light mist that wove around the hedges and flower beds, granting the estate an enigmatic allure. Beyond the estate, a hidden lake shimmered delicately, its surface perfectly calm, encircled by thick woods that separated the manor from the outside realm. Quite the setting, wouldn't you agree? I remarked, admiring the imposing structure of the manor. But Mr. Poirot was not a man for mere admiration. You see the ivy? It sprawls uncontrollably in certain areas secluded, perhaps, that all is not as orderly as it appears. Before I could reply, the front door swung wide open, and a figure stepped forward to welcome us. Charles Montague, a man in his middle years, likely in his late 40s, sported a lean aristocratic visage with hair that was beginning to gray at the edges. His clothing was immaculate, but an air of distraction surrounded him, as if his mind was elsewhere. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome to Ivy Manor, he said, offering a handshake. His voice was smooth and almost theatrical, yet his smile failed to reach his eyes. "I trust your journey was enjoyable." "Most enjoyable, Mr. Montague," Poirot replied, shaking his hand and giving a slight bow. "Though I must admit, the fog adds a distinct atmosphere, wouldn't you say?" Montague chuckled, though the laughter felt rehearsed. "Ah, yes, the typical English weather. One must learn to adapt, I suppose. Please, step inside, the others are eager to meet you." We followed him into the manor's grand entrance hall, where the lavishness of the surroundings immediately captured my attention. Polished wood glimmered beneath our feet, and Persian rugs muted our footfalls. A crystal chandelier dangled from the ceiling, casting a warm radiance over the area. Yet for all its splendor, an unmistakable tension lingered in the atmosphere, suggesting the manor's residents were not entirely comfortable. Waiting to greet us was a thin, anxious man in his 30s who hovered near Montague like a spectre. "This is Mr. Reginald Thornton, my cousin and secretary," Montague introduced. "He oversees the estate's affairs." Thornton gave a stiff nod, his gaze flickering between Poirot and me. "A pleasure, gentlemen," he said, though his tone conveyed the opposite sentiment. There was something cautiously guarded about him, as if Poirot's presence troubled him significantly. Ever observant, Poirot offered a polite smile. "Mr. Thornton, it is an honor." We were then ushered into the drawing room, where the household had assembled. The room exuded elegance, with velvet sofas arranged around a grand fireplace and a gramophone playing softly in the corner. Among the guests was Colonel Hargreaves, a retired military officer with a ruddy complexion and a booming laugh, an old friend of the Montague family. However, his jovial exterior concealed a deep-seated resentment towards Charles's brother, Arthur Montague, stemming from a military scandal that had cost the colonel a promotion and tarnished his reputation. Also present was Lady Penelope, a wealthy widow in her 50s, renowned for her sharp wit and even sharper curiosity. Her presence at Ivy Manor was indeed noteworthy. Not merely a social visit, she had heavily financed Charles Montague's business efforts, fueling speculation that she had also settled some of Arthur's considerable gambling obligations, which entwined her destiny with the family's in ways that few recognized. Miss Elalana, a young woman likely around 25, sat quietly, her eyes distant and observant. She was familiar with the Montague family. Years prior, she had been engaged to Charles's brother, but their relationship ended sourly, leaving her burdened with secrets she preferred to keep hidden and a heart still cast in darkness from the past. "Colonel Hargreaves, Lady Penelope, Miss Elalana Montague," announced the host. "Let me introduce Mr. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings." The colonel stood, extending a hand. "I've heard of you, Poirot. You've solved quite a few tricky cases, haven't you? It's a pleasure to have you here, though I can't fathom what good old Charles needs you for. A missing bauble, perhaps?" Lady Penelope leaned in, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone. "Oh, but this isn't just any bauble, Colonel. It's a Montague heirloom, isn't it, Charles? I would wager it's quite valuable and linked to family secrets, no doubt." Montague shifted awkwardly. "Well, yes, but I suspect it's nothing more than a misplaced item. Still, one mustn't be too cautious." Miss Elalana remained silent, her fingers lightly tracing her teacup's edge as she gazed into the flames, her quietness weighty with untold history. The servants made their presence felt. Jenkins, the butler, stood rigidly by the entrance, his face a facade of professionalism, although his hands quivered slightly as he poured tea. Molly, the young maid, flitted around the room, her keen gaze catching everything. She met my eyes and offered a brief, knowing smile, which I returned with slight awkwardness. Meanwhile, Poirot had settled near the fire, his eyes scanning the space with marked interest. "A lovely setting, Miss Montague," he commented, "but I can't help but sense a hint of tension among your guests." Montague let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, it's nothing to worry about, I assure you, just the normal ebb and flow of a country house weekend." Poirot's mustache twitched subtly, suggesting he remained unconvinced. "Perhaps," he responded, "but the little gray cells are already spinning. For my part, I was captivated by the manor's splendor, the rich tapestries, the shining silver, the faint aroma of smoke from the hearth, yet I couldn't dismiss the pervasive unease that hung in the air. Reginald Thornton particularly struck me as a man on edge, his gaze darting toward Montague with each moment. It was during tea that the topic of the theft was finally addressed. Montague, with studied nonchalance, mentioned the missing cigarette case. "It's a trivial matter," he said, dismissively waving his hand. "Probably just misplaced by one of the staff, but I figured, why not let the best man handle it?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. In a somewhat hesitant manner, Montague weighed his next words, his fingers softly drumming on the armrest of his chair. "I must admit that it is a family heirloom that I would prefer not to lose forever. Yet, I have faith that it will resurface." Poirot acknowledged this with a nod, though his expression conveyed lingering dissatisfaction. "Certainly," he replied smoothly. "I will exhaust every effort to retrieve it." As the night progressed, the guests began to withdraw for the evening. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows like a sentient being. Poirot and I were escorted to our quarters by Jenkins, who appeared keen to distance himself from us as swiftly as possible. Once we were alone, Poirot turned to me with a contemplative look. "What are your thoughts on this, Hastings?" I shrugged in response. "It seems to me that there's an excessive amount of concern for a cigarette case, but I imagine Montague has his motivations." Poirot offered a slight smile. "Ah, but what might those motivations be, mon ami?" "That is indeed the crucial question. Why does our host seem so distracted? Why does Monsieur Thornton observe him with such intensity? And what about the other guests, each harboring their own secrets?" I frowned slightly. "Are you suggesting there's more to this than mere theft?" Poirot's eyes glimmered in the dim light. "I am convinced that there is a greater depth here than is initially apparent, mon ami. Much more." With that, he bid me good night, leaving me to contemplate the mysteries that awaited us. Chapter 2: Arthur's Unexpected Arrival, a Family Feud Ignites. Morning at Ivy Manor emerged with a dull gray pallor, the fog heavily pressing against the mullioned windows as if loath to relinquish its grip on the estate. I was stirred from slumber by the persistent patter of rain, a soft yet unwavering sound that accentuated the house's stillness. Hercule Poirot, a man of early rising habits, was already seated in the dining hall when I joined him. His tidy figure stood out in stark contrast to the grandeur of the room. The long mahogany table shone under the chandelier's glow, while the stern ancestral portraits gazed down upon us with an air of disapproval. Charles Montague occupied the head of the table, his fingers creating an irregular rhythm against the cloth, a subtle shadow of anxiety crossing his otherwise calm demeanor. To his side was Reginald Thornton, his cousin and secretary, whose slender frame and pale skin suggested a man in a perpetual state of tension. The atmosphere between them was taut, marked by an uncomfortable civility that Poirot's keen observations wouldn't miss. As he savored his coffee, black as was his preference due to his disdain for the English custom of adding milk, I noticed the faintest twitch of his mustache, a telltale sign that his mind was already engaged in analysis. Colonel Hargreaves, seated directly across from Montague, added to the tension that filled the room. Was in excellent shape, his voice piercing through the morning stillness like a bugle. And there I was, lads, right in the heart of it, Burma 1898, staring down a group of rebels armed only with my wits and a weathered bayonet. They took a shot at me, but I ducked just in the nick of time, and it's safe to say I gave him quite a surprise. He gaped while thumping the table with a hefty hand. Lady Penelope, always keen for an opening in the conversation, shifted her bright gaze toward Miss Evelina, who was seated at the opposite end of the table, her demeanor as understated as her gray dress. Honestly, Colonel, must we discuss war over breakfast? I'm far more interested in the stories of Miss Evelina. From where did you say you come, my dear? Miss Evelina's fingers froze around her teacup, her eyes cast downward. I didn't, she replied, her tone sharp like an icy wall against Lady Penelope's eager warmth. The widow's smile wavered, but only briefly. Before additional pleasantries could be exchanged, a sudden knock echoed through the hall, bouncing off the paneled walls. Jenkins, the butler, hurried to the door, his steps betraying a hint of concern. He returned shortly, his complexion pale, his voice shaky. Mr. Arthur Montague, sir, he announced, stepping aside. A figure entered the room with the intensity of a storm, uninvited and unapologetic. Arthur Montague was a rugged man, his jaw rough with stubble, his coat creased and travel-worn, his dark eyes aflame with a fierce energy that stood in stark contrast to Charles's cultivated refinement. The brothers were as different as night and day. While Charles embodied the gentleman of leisure, Arthur represented the vagabond, a tempest disrupting the manor's tranquility. Charles, Arthur growled, his voice a low rumble, I need to speak with you alone. Charles stood, his face paling, a quiver running through his hands. Arthur, he murmured, as if the name were a shock. Yes, of course, the library then, he added, glancing at Reginald, who stood ready and unwavering, his loyalty evident but unspoken. Reginald will accompany us. The three left, causing a wave of whispers to ripple through the dining area. Lady Penelope leaned forward, her voice conspiratorial. Ah, the prodigal son returns. I've heard rumors of Arthur Montague's gambling debts resurfacing from years ago. What might he want? Colonel Hargreaves scoffed, trouble, mark my words. Always was a wild card, that one. I looked at Miss Evelina, noticing her grip on her teacup had tightened, her knuckles turning white against the porcelain. She remained silent, yet her quietness conveyed a great deal. Beside me, Poirot stayed motionless, his expression inscrutable, though I knew his thoughts were racing. What are your thoughts, Poirot? I whispered. He tilted his head, his voice a soft murmur. Most intriguing, Hastings. The arrival of Monsieur Arthur is akin to dropping a stone into tranquil water. The ripples will reveal much. Rising with an easy demeanor, he beckoned me to accompany him on a brief walk, perhaps to assist with digestion. We slipped out of the room and positioned ourselves near the library door, where soon we heard raised voices. You took my life, Charles. Arthur's tone was raw and accusatory. Everything I had, everything I was, you seized it, and now you sit here acting like the lord of the manor. I promise I will expose you for the fraud you are. Charles responded with a shaky, defensive tone. You don't get it, Arthur, it wasn't like that. I had no choice. No choice? Arthur sarcastically laughed, a bitter sound escaping him. You chose betrayal, and I will ensure everyone knows it. Reginald's voice interjected, steady yet firm. Arthur, enough. This isn't the time or place. Leave now, and we'll discuss this privately. Privately? Arthur sneered, glancing dismissively at the detective present. I'm not the one acting foolishly here. The door flew open as Arthur stormed past us, his shoulder colliding with mine as he headed for the front entrance. The door slammed shut, creating a thunderous echo that punctuated his departure. Moments later, Charles emerged, his hair tousled and eyes frantic. A family misunderstanding, he muttered, avoiding our gaze. Nothing for you to concern yourselves with, gentlemen. He retreated upstairs, Reginald following him like a shadow. Poirot watched them leave, fingers steepled beneath his chin. A misunderstanding, he reflected, yet the fear in his eyes tells a different story. Why does the arrival of Monsieur Arthur inspire such dread, I wonder? I frowned, asking whether he thought it related to the cigarette case. Poirot's lips curved slightly. The cigarette case, Hastings, is merely a trifling distraction, perhaps, from a much deeper secret. No, this involves matters of the heart and the past. We shall see after the morning's excitement. The day at Ivy Manor settled into a semblance of routine, despite an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. Poirot, ever the astute observer, suggested a stroll through the estate grounds, claiming it was to admire the gardens while undoubtedly surveying the area. I accompanied him, our footsteps crunching on the gravel paths as we passed the mist-covered lake and the dense woods that surrounded the manor. It holds many secrets, Poirot remarked, eyes scanning the horizon, and secrets often reveal themselves in time. Upon returning to the house, we discovered the other guests occupied with their own activities. Colonel Hargreaves had taken to the billiard room, his booming laughter resonating through the halls, while Lady Penelope had engaged Miss Eleanor in the drawing room, her relentless curiosity undeterred by the young woman's reluctance. As the afternoon faded, the household assembled for tea, a ritual providing a veneer of normality. Yet, the absence of Charles Montague, who had sequestered himself in his study with Reginald Thornton, was distinctly felt. The conversation was stilted, with guests exchanging pleasantries while their thoughts no doubt lingered on the confrontation earlier that day. The dinner that evening was a muted event, the fog beyond thickening into a veil that appeared to permeate the manor itself. Charles was missing, claiming a headache, while Reginald navigated inquiries with practiced evasion, his responses polished yet hollow. The guests dined in almost complete silence, the sound of utensils a stark contrast to the morning's turmoil. Later, Poirot stepped onto the terrace, his small form outlined against the misty stretch of the lake. I joined him, the cool air raising goosebumps on my skin. "What's on your mind, Poirot?" I inquired as he stared into the fog, his voice gentle yet determined. "I believe, Hastings, that we find ourselves at the brink of a complex psychological enigma. The pieces may be disarrayed now, but I am confident they will unite." With that, he turned back towards the house, leaving me to ponder the growing shadows that loomed over Ivy. Chapter 3: A Body in the Library. A murder occurs in the night. As morning arrived at Ivy Manor, it carried with it a chill that seemed to infiltrate the very structure. Outside, the fog coiled around the windows like an unwilling shroud. I had awakened early, the uneasiness from the previous day still embedded in my bones, and made my way to the dining hall where Hercule Poirot awaited. He was seated at the end of the table, his small hands neatly folded, eyes sparkling with that distinctive sharpness that characterized every hour he was awake. The atmosphere was quiet save for the soft clink of porcelain as Jenkins, the butler, moved about us, his expression taut with a focused intensity one could not yet understand. Charles Monteague presided over the gathering, though his usual dramatic flair seemed subdued, his fingers fidgeted restlessly on the tablecloth. Reginald Thornton sat nearby, his slender figure bent as if protecting an unspoken truth. The guests Colonel Hargreaves, Lady Penelope, and Miss Eleanor ate their breakfast with a muted demeanor, the shadow of Arthur Monteague's abrupt arrival and exit still casting a pall over us. Jenkins shattered the quiet as he burst into the room with a shout that sent a chill through everyone present. His face was ashen, voice trembling as he exclaimed, "Sir, Mr. Arthur, he's dead, sir, in the library." A bullet to his head, oh, the horror! A wave of shock swept through the assembly. Colonel Hargreaves rose partway, his ruddy cheeks burning with indignation. "Dead, by Jove! What's this absurdity?" Lady Penelope placed a hand to her chest, exhaling dramatically. "Arthuro, the horror!" Miss Eleanor, seated apart, paled further and gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. She remained silent, her quietness more meaningful than any outcry. Poirot sprang to his feet instantly, his composed authority slicing through the turmoil. "Jenkins, lead me to him immediately," he commanded with unwavering tone. "Hastings, you will join me." We trailed behind the butler through the echoing halls, the dark oak paneling seeming to close in on us. The library door was ajar, and upon entering, a chill dread gripped me as I took in the scene. Arthur Monteague lay slumped in a high-backed armchair, his head at a strange angle, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. A bullet was embedded in his temple, his eyes staring blankly, and his rugged face locked in a grimace that could have signified shock or defiance. But how had he returned? Just yesterday, he had stormed in. From the moment he departed the manor, it was as tumultuous as his entrance, yet now, he lay motionless within these walls. Poirot's keen observations flitted around the space, and I followed his focus to the floor near the library entrance. There, partially obscured by the rug, was a faint trail of damp, fresh mud, indicating someone had recently come in from outside. A soaked cloak carelessly draped over a chair by the doorway hinted that Arthur had indeed returned under the veil of night, perhaps to continue their argument or to retrieve something he had forgotten. Poirot approached the deceased with his characteristic meticulousness, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. "A single shot to the temple," he remarked, leaning in closer. "The blood is still fresh, yet where is the firearm?" Quite puzzling. I surveyed the room, my heartbeat escalating. The library, once so orderly just a day before, now displayed clear signs of disruption. A heavy book lay sprawled on the floor by Arthur's feet, its pages crumpled as if it had been dropped in a rush. The rug beneath was askew, implying a struggle had taken place. The window, securely shut and latched, showed no indication of having been tampered with. The grand fireplace stood cold, its ashes untouched. Poirot's gaze was fixed on the rug, where subtle scuff marks disturbed the pile. "There has been movement here," he said quietly, contemplating the evidence of a struggle. His eyes narrowed as they landed on a muddy footprint near the bookshelf, its shape faint yet unmistakable, and the mud still wet from outside, despite the window being locked. "Fascinating," he noted. Before I could formulate a theory, Charles Monteague appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of feigned shock. My goodness, he exclaimed, his voice trembling just enough to hint at premeditated theatrics. Arthur must have done this himself. He was always so unstable, you know. After our argument yesterday, I worried he might. Poirot turned to him, his expression inscrutable. Are you suggesting suicide, Miss Monteague? Charles nodded, his eyes darting nervously. Yes, yes, it must be. He looked distraught, almost unhinged. What else could it be? Poirot's mustache quivered slightly, a subtle sign of skepticism. Yet there is no firearm. A man who takes his own life wouldn't hide the weapon afterward, would he? And note the angle of the wound, it slopes upward. A self-inflicted injury would not present this way. No, monsieur, this is not a case of suicide. Charles's hands trembled as he clasped them together, his demeanor beginning to crack. But who would hear it happen in my own home? To which Poirot replied coolly, that, precisely, is what I intend to discover. He turned to Jenkins, who was lingering at the door, wringing his hands. Seal this room, Jenkins. No one is to enter without my explicit permission. Poirot softened his tone, coaxing as he asked, Tell me, Jenkins, did you hear anything out of the ordinary last night? The butler's face fell, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. 2. I'm not entirely certain, sir, everything is hazy. I was in the servants' hall when I heard a sound around midnight, I believe. It was a dull thud, reminiscent of something heavy falling. Initially, I thought it was just the house shifting or perhaps the wind. I never imagined it was something else. His voice cracked under the weight of his horror. Poirot nodded, clearly processing the details. Very well, you may leave, he said as Jenkins stepped away. Poirot resumed examining the scene, his movements meticulous and revealing his keen concentration. He knelt beside the footprint, outlining its shape with a fingertip. This mud, he remarked quietly, it's from outside. Indeed, but the window remains secure. There's a riddle here, Hastings, I replied, furrowing my brow as I wrestled with the implications. If the perpetrator didn't enter via the window, then how did they gain access? Poirot's eyes sparked with that familiar glint, contemplating whether it was monotony or perhaps something even more cunning. Poirot's gaze swept the room again, landing on a cushion that lay askew on the floor by the armchair. He lifted it, examining it closely. A small singed hole disrupted the fabric, and a faint whiff of gunpowder lingered. Ah, he said softly, indicating the killer's cleverness in using this to muffle the shot, definitely a thud rather than a bang, allowing the household to remain undisturbed. I looked at the cushion, impressed by his deduction. Brilliant, Poirot, that explains why no one rushed to investigate. Precisely, the little gray cells never tire, Poirot replied as he continued to inspect the cushion. I recalled the previous night amidst the furious wind and rattling windows. I had heard a distant thud, which in my groggy state, I attributed to the house creaking under the storm's fury. It now dawned on me that it must have been that muffled shot, and Poirot must have heard it too, though he showed no hint of it at the time. Our contemplation was cut short by the arrival of the local constabulary, a burly sergeant and his deputy, who entered the room with an air of unfamiliarity to such grim circumstances. They took control of the situation, exhibiting both respect and confusion as they secured the library and began questioning the staff under Poirot's keen observation. It wasn't until midday that the inspector from Scotland Yard arrived, his robust physique filling the doorway. His expression combined annoyance with a subtle fondness. Jap, I exclaimed, grateful to see a familiar face. what brings you out here?" He entered, surveying the scene with an experienced eye. "Heard from the locals murder," he stated. "And a messy one at that. Caught the first train down here, but I didn't expect you to be in the middle of it, though." Poirot smiled faintly. "Always a pleasure, Inspector, and yes, it indeed is murder. Most intriguing, I assure you." Japp's gaze fell upon Arthur's body, his brow furrowing. "Increasing seems like suicide to me, a gunshot to the head. We will locate the weapon shortly, that's for sure." Poirot counted as he shook his head. "It's not so straightforward, the angle of the wounds, the lack of the weapon, and the indications of a struggle suggest a different story. Perhaps there was an intruder, or this scene has been staged to mislead us." Skepticism was carved into his features, although a flicker of uncertainty passed through his eyes. "Always with the theories, right? Well then, what have you found?" Poirot pointed to the scuff marks and the footprint. "These are a starting point, along with the locked window. But mud from the grounds, how did it end up here?" I pondered, crouched by the footprint, my demeanor cautiously reflective. "It could be that the killer entered and then locked up afterward, or there might be another entrance we have yet to notice," Poirot concurred. "And we will uncover it, you and I." With a curt nod, he addressed the constables lingering in the hall. "All right, gentlemen, let's get to work. Search the grounds for that gun and inspect every corner of this place. Hopkins, gather the staff for their statements." As the men dispersed, Poirot and I retreated to the drawing room, where the household had been gathered like sheep in a pen, the atmosphere thick with tension. Reginald paced in front of the fireplace, his hands tightly clasped behind him. Lady Penelope sat on a sofa, her eyes aglow with curiosity, while Miss Eleanor stared out the window, her expression a mask of quiet sorrow. "Oh, Mr. Poirot," Lady Penelope exclaimed upon our entry, "what a dreadful situation. Poor Arthur, surely it was his own hand driven by despair, or perhaps that old Montague curse I've heard about." Poirot regarded her with a courteous nod. "Madam, I fear it is neither despair nor curse, it is murder." A collective gasp rippled through the room, and Reginald halted mid-step, his complexion pale. "Murder? But how? Why?" Poirot adjusted his posture with a flourish, his voice filled with assurance. "That is what I will determine. For now, remain here. The inspector will want to speak with all of you." He turned to me, his gaze incisive. "Come, Hastings, the library conceals further secrets." As we returned to supervise the search, I couldn't shake the cold that gripped me. Yet Poirot was in his element, his mind already intertwining the strands of this dark narrative. Chapter 4: Questions and Clues. Suspicions deepen. I must admit, the dining room of Ivy Manor had assumed an entirely different atmosphere since the dreadful discovery of Arthur Montague's body. The long mahogany table, shimmering under the soft light of the chandelier, now felt less like a symbol of elegance and more like a stage for the drama unfolding. The dining room, with its heavy oak panels and faint scent of beeswax, seemed to close in around us, the air thick with unexpressed tension. Suspicions. I found myself alongside Poirot, my longtime companion and the keenest intellect I have ever encountered, feeling the heaviness of the situation. As he was on the brink of assuming control, Poirot's petite, organized figure positioned itself at the table's forefront, his emerald eyes flashing with that familiar fervor. Surrounding us were the household members, Charles Montague, looking pallid and restless, nervously fiddling with the edge of his napkin, Reginald Thornton, his hands clenched so tightly they quivered. Colonel Hargreaves, with his ruddy complexion set in a grim expression, Lady Penelope, her curiosity barely hidden beneath a veneer of propriety, Miss Eleanor, engrossed in her own world of grief, and the staff, Jenkins and Molly, uneasily lingering at the periphery. Madame Zemisa Poirot began, his voice slicing through the atmosphere like a finely honed weapon. The passing of MSU Arthur Montague poses a mystery that requires our investigation. I will converse with each of you individually to reveal the truth, starting with Monsieur Charles Montague. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room, yet no one voiced a dissenting opinion. Charles abruptly rose, his chair scraping against the floor, and trailed Poirot to a small study adjacent to the dining area, while I followed, my heart racing with anticipation. The study was a cozy space, lined with books and saturated with the aroma of leather and timber. Poirot settled into an armchair, his posture impeccably straightened, while Charles sat across from him, appearing as though he were facing a firing squad. Monsieur Montague, Poirot began, his voice compassionate yet underscored by determination, please recount your last encounter with your brother. Charles swallowed audibly, his gaze locked on the carpet. It was yesterday morning in the library. We had an argument. He was in a rage, accusing me of things I'd rather not repeat. I tried to appease him, but he wouldn't hear it. He stormed out, and I returned to my room early. That's all I know, I swear. Poirot tilted his head slightly, his mustache twitching faintly, a telltale sign of his active mind. What exactly did he accuse you of? Charles's gaze flickered up and then away, his fingers fidgeting with his sleeve. Family matters, Mr. Poirot. Old disputes, nothing more. It's not worth revisiting now, surely. Yet, monsieur, the return of your brother after such a long absence implies these family matters held considerable weight, Poirot pressed, his voice smooth yet firm. What precisely did he accuse you of? A betrayal, perhaps? A financial wrongdoing or something more intimate? Charles's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. He claimed I had taken his inheritance, that I cheated him out of what was rightfully his. But it's not true, I swear. Our father's will was clear, and I've managed the estate to the best of my ability. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet he chose to confront you. Did he threaten any legal action, or was it something more ominous? Immediate? Charles's hands trembled as he brought them together. He claimed he would ruin my reputation and expose me, but I didn't, I couldn't. His composure began to shatter. Poirot reclined, his gaze unwavering, and inquired, Monsieur, what prompted you to invite your guests this weekend? Was it simply for socializing, or did you have another intention? Charles blinked, momentarily taken aback. I aimed to celebrate the estate's prosperity and demonstrate that everything was well, but with Arthur's arrival, everything fell apart. And your guests, do any of them harbor ill will towards your brother? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively gentle. Charles's eyes widened. No, not at all. They're friends, acquaintances. Why would they? Ah, but when it comes to murder, one must consider every possibility, Poirot interjected. For now, you may return to the others. Charles stood, visibly relieved, his shoulders slumping as he hurried out. Poirot turned to me, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He hides something, Hastings, his nerves give him away. I nodded, my mind racing. He was unnaturally fidgety. Poirot, I'd bet that disagreement was more than a minor altercation. Do you believe he is concealing something significant? Poirot's eyes sparkled with intrigue. Indeed, mon ami. The real questions are what the secret is and why it matters. Next to enter was Reginald Thornton, Charles's cousin and secretary. He was a slender man, his face thin, with hands that twitched like a cornered animal. After a brief moment, he sat down, glancing toward the door, seemingly searching for a way out. Mr. Thornton, Poirot began, his tone controlled, you are very loyal to Mr. Charles, are you not? Reginald sat up straighter, his voice steady despite the shaking of his hands. He's a good man, Mr. Poirot. Arthur was the troublemaker, always creating chaos. Charles wouldn't harm a fly, I'd put my life on it. Poirot's eyebrow lifted slightly. Your loyalty is commendable. But tell me, monsieur, what exactly is your role at Ivy Manor? As secretary, you must be involved in many family matters. Reginald's fingers twitched. I manage the estate's accounts, handle correspondence, that sort of thing. It's a position of trust, and I take it seriously. And in that capacity, have you ever encountered any irregularities, perhaps something that could have angered Mr. Arthur? Reginald's eyes shifted away. No, nothing like that. The estate is in good shape due to Charles's management. Poirot leaned in, his gaze intense. Yet, Monsieur Arthur returned with claims of theft. Did he ever approach you regarding these concerns? Reginald's complexion paled. He did mention something, but I dismissed it as nonsense. Charles is an honorable man. And what of your relationship with Mr. Arthur? Were you on good terms? Reginald hesitated. We were never close. He was always the rebellious one causing trouble, so I preferred to keep my distance. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And on the night of the murder, you claim to have been in your room composing letters. Were these letters personal or regarding the estate? Reginald's hands halted, though a subtle tremor remained in his fingers. Personal matters, Mr. Pure family correspondence, he replied. I understand, Poirot murmured. And you heard nothing out of the ordinary that night? No sounds coming from the library. Reginald shook his head. Nothing, as I mentioned, just the regular creaks of the house and the wind. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Thank you, monsieur. You may leave. Once Reginald departed, Poirot turned to me, his voice lowered. His loyalty is a protection for someone, Hastings, but for whom? And what reasons does he have for clinging so urgently to his alibi? I frowned in confusion. He appeared shaken, didn't he? Almost as if he anticipated being discovered. Poirot nodded. Precisely. There's more to Ms. Thornton than what is apparent. Next came Miss Eleanor, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She was fragile, her pale complexion framed by a modest shawl, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. As she took a seat, she grasped her hands tightly, making her knuckles turn white. Mademoiselle Eleanor, Poirot began softly, almost soothingly, you were acquainted with Monsieur Arthur, correct? She nodded, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Yes, we were familiar long ago. Familiar or perhaps something deeper? Poirot gently prompted. There are rumors you and Mr. Arthur were once close, potentially even engaged. Her breath caught, and she averted her gaze. Yes, we were engaged, but it ended poorly. He left me, and I've tried to forget. Yet his return must have reignited old emotions, Poirot observed, his tone encouraging. Did you converse with him during his visit? Did he mention anything that might clarify his sudden arrival? She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, we barely exchanged words. He looked at me but said nothing. I couldn't handle it, so I withdrew. And what was your purpose for being at Ivy Manor this weekend? She hesitated, her voice cracking. Charles is an old family friend. He thought a change of scenery might benefit me after everything. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was clearly working. On the night of the murder, you were in your room. Did you hear anything unusual, mademoiselle? Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. I spent a little time in the drawing room with Lady Penelope, then I went to my room. I only heard the wind and possibly a muffled sound akin to something heavy falling, but I dismissed it. No further sounds, no voices, no footsteps. She shook her head. I was lost in my own thoughts, Mr. Poirot. I paid little heed to the noises from the house. Poirot nodded, his expression kind yet investigative. Thank you, mademoiselle, you have provided invaluable assistance. As she hurried from the room, I turned to Poirot, my heart feeling heavy for the poor girl. Is it possible that her history with Arthur is linked to his murder? Poirot's brow knitted in contemplation. Hastings, it could either serve as a motive or merely distract us. We need to proceed with caution. Colonel Hargreaves entered next, embodying his usual rigid military demeanor, dominating the space with his presence and speaking in a booming voice despite the confines of the room. Billiards. That's where I was, he stated, having played some rounds by myself as no one else was interested in joining, a real shame. Poirot's eyes sparkled slightly. So, Colonel, what brings you to Ivy Manor this weekend? I assume you're an old friend of the family. Hargreaves puffed his chest with pride, confirming, indeed, Charles invited me for some shooting, although the weather has not cooperated. And how do you know Mr. Arthur? Were you close? The colonel's expression darkened. Knew of him, more like, always stirring trouble. I never understood why Charles tolerated him. And on the murder night, you were by yourself in the billiard room, correct? Hargreaves acknowledged with a nod. Yes, just passing the time, nobody else was keen on a game, so I played a few solo rounds. And you didn't hear anything peculiar from the library? Hargreaves scoffed. This house creaks like an old ship, but that's about it. Now that you mention it, there was a muffled thud around midnight. Thought it was just the house shifting. Poirot's eyes sharpened at the mention of the thud. Could it have possibly been a gunshot? The colonel blinked, his bravado wavering. I suppose it could have been, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Did you not look into the sound? Hargreaves shook his head. No, it didn't seem to warrant investigation. Old houses make all sorts of noises. Poirot nodded, his expression contemplative. Thank you, Colonel, that will be all for now. As Hargreaves strode out, I couldn't help but chuckle. He certainly is a character, all bluster and brandy. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, but behind the bravado, there's something to be cautious of. We shouldn't overlook him yet. Lady Penelope swept in, bursting with enthusiasm and gleaming with the thrill of gossip. Oh, Mr. Poirot, what a terrible affair this is. Arthur was quite the wild spirit, you know, debts, scandals, the whole package. I heard he even ran off with a married woman from Bath once, and don't forget about those racehorses. Poirot raised his hand, his voice polite yet assertive. "Madam, if you would be so kind, tell me what brings you to Ivy Manor this weekend. I assume you are a friend of the family." She blinked, then beamed. "Oh yes, I've known Charles for many years. We circulate within the same social circles. He invited me for a peaceful weekend in the countryside, though it has turned out to be anything but silent. And regarding your association with Mr. Arthur, did you have a close relationship?" Her smile wavered. "Not particularly. He always embodied a blend of charm and danger, so I maintained my distance." "On the evening of the murder, you were in the drawing room with Miss Evelina. Did anything strike you as odd in her demeanor?" Lady Penelope's eyes widened. She was unusually quiet, even for her, and spent a lot of time gazing out the window, lost in her own thoughts. I attempted to spark up a conversation, but she seemed uninterested. "Later, when you retired for the night, you detected footsteps and a muffled bang. Could you elaborate on the footsteps?" She paused for a moment. "They were light and swift, as if someone were rushing. The bang resembled a slamming door, but it sounded distant, as if it were coming from far away." "You didn't go to check it out?" She laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "Goodness, no. I'm not inclined to wander into the dark. I remained where I was, although I did hear a door creak later. Might have been the wind." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Most enlightening, madam. You may leave now." As she exited, I smiled. She can talk, can't she? Could weave a tale all day. Poirot's lips twitched. Indeed, Hastings. However, amid the chatter, there are fragments of truth. The servants were the last to arrive, and I found myself inexplicably intrigued by their versions. Jenkins, the butler, seemed still shaken from the shock earlier. "I did hear footsteps, sir," he said, his voice unsteady. "After midnight, I believe, coming from the east wing. At first, I thought it was just the house shifting, but now I'm uncertain." Poirot leaned in. "Mr. Jenkins, you have been in the service of the Montague family for many years, correct?" Jenkins nodded. "Yes, sir, for at least 10 years. In that time, have you ever observed any conflicts between Mr. Charles and Mr. Arthur?" Jenkins hesitated. "Well, sir, they've always had their differences. Mr. Arthur was always the wild one, while Mr. Charles was more reserved, but I never anticipated it would escalate to this. On the night of the murder, you heard footsteps. Can you describe them?" Jenkins fidgeted with his hands, twisting his apron. Soft, like someone trying to remain unheard. A slow tread, then a pause. "I was half asleep in my quarters, so I didn't think much of it until now." "Did you see anyone in the east wing that night?" Jenkins shook his head. "No, sir, I stayed in my room." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, you may leave." Next was Molly, the maid, her eyes sharp despite her unease. "I saw Mr. Thornton near the library earlier that evening, before 10 o'clock, I believe. He appeared flustered, pacing a bit, but I didn't inquire." Poirot's gaze shifted to me and back to her. "Mademoiselle Molly, you possess a keen observation. What are your thoughts on the guests? Have you noticed anything?" Molly paused, exhibiting behavior that was quite out of the ordinary. "Well, sir, Miss Evelina appears to be. Lady Penelope is often inquiring, while the colonel tends to remain reserved. Mr. Thornton, on the other hand, is perpetually observing Mr. Charles, seemingly anxious about something. On the evening of the murder, you mentioned hearing a faint pop or a muffled thud. Can you elaborate on that? She agreed, stating it resembled a cork popping, albeit quieter, followed by a thud as if something heavy dropped to the ground. Initially, I thought it was just the house settling, but now it appears it could signify something more. Poirot expressed gratitude towards Mademoiselle Molly, commending her assistance, and with the interviews wrapped up, he guided me to the library. His mind was still grappling with the information we had gathered. The inspector was present, supervising the constables who were still searching for the missing firearm. However, Poirot's focus was elsewhere as his keen eyes scanned the room, absorbing every nuance until they landed on the bookcases that adorned the walls. He halted, his gaze transfixed on a particular section where one book protruded slightly, its spine misaligned compared to the others. Though a minor flaw, to Poirot, it stood out prominently. Gradually, he approached the shelf, his fingers gliding softly over the books, as if to discern their hidden truths. Books, Hastings, he softly stated, are the quiet witnesses in this room, and occasionally they contain more than mere words. He halted at the displaced book, an aged edition of The Hound of the Baskervilles, and with a purposeful gesture, he pulled it from its place. As he did so, a folded paper fell from its pages, swirling to the floor like a leaf in the fall. Poirot bent down to gather it, delicately unfolding the note as he examined it. His eyes sparkled with the excitement of unraveling a mystery. "Ah, Hastings," he murmured, "what do we have here?" Reading aloud, he found the note addressed to Charles, declaring that he had taken something that did not belong to him and that it would be reclaimed or revealed, signed by Arthur. A thrill ran through me. I exclaimed that this suggested a motive, cleverly hidden. Poirot acknowledged this, his demeanor contemplative. Indeed, mon ami, Arthur must have concealed this during his visita threat discreetly tucked away for Charles to discover or for us to find. It indicates a profound grievance that may have compelled someone to act out of desperation. His report arrived swiftly, stating no gun had been found yet, but the footprint matched those from the servants' quarters. Poirot's expression sharpened. The boots were a clue, yet it was the letter hidden so cunningly that resonated with him. It unveiled the crucial elements at stake: motives, not mere murkiness. This letter ultimately serves as the key to comprehending why Arthur came back and why someone felt the need to silence him. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. We must ponder what this taking alludes to, perhaps a theft or something else entirely. More personal, it is evident that Arthur felt wronged by Charles and was resolute in his mission to rectify the situation or seek vengeance. I observed as Poirot's intellect assembled the clues, recognizing the letter as a notable discovery, yet aware it represented merely a fragment of a greater whole. Nonetheless, it marked the beginning, and with Poirot investigating, I was confident the truth would soon emerge. That evening in our quarters, Poirot meticulously sketched a timeline in his notebook, his pencil moving with the precision I admired. "The pieces fit, Hastings," he murmured. "It is the intellect, not the dirt, that will unravel this mystery." I nodded, my thoughts swirling. "You've uncovered something, haven't you?" His enigmatic smile replied, "Patience, mon ami. The little gray cells are certainly at work." Chapter 5, Secrets Unravel. A concealed passage alters everything. The morning fog clung to Ivy Manor like an unwelcome visitor, its tendrils wrapping around the ivy-covered walls and blurring the outlines of the outside world. Inside the library, where the heavy shadow of Arthur Montague's demise still lingered, Hercule Poirot and I prepared to untangle another strand of this complex enigma. The atmosphere was cool and lightly musty, with the aroma of aged leather and parchment intertwining with a sharper, metallic scent of congealed blood on the rug. Poirot's keen eyes scanned the room, finally resting on the grand fireplace, its ashes untouched since the night of the murder. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "The fireplace is cold, but there's a faint draught most curious." He approached it, his fingers grazing the mantel with a care that seemed to mask his intentions. Then, he knelt, peering into the hearth. "Ah," he softly exclaimed, "there's something here, perhaps a lever?" In one swift motion, he activated a concealed catch, causing part of the wall beside the fireplace to swing open, unveiling a narrow, shadowy passageway. "Good heavens!" I said, drawing nearer. "A secret passage!" Poirot's mustache twitched with triumph. "Indeed, a passage like this serves as the ideal accomplice to a crime. Let's discover where it leads." We stepped into the darkness, the air turning damp and chilly as we descended. The walls were rough-hewn stone slick with moisture, and the uneven floor yielded underfoot. Poirot's torch cast a thin beam ahead, illuminating cobwebs that hung like delicate draperies. The passage spiraled downward, its confines closing in until it finally opened up, bringing us to the lake's edge. The fog had lifted, revealing the tranquil waters and the trees beyond, their limbs stark against the gray sky. Poirot knelt, his sharp gaze scanning the muddy ground. "Footprints," he declared, pointing at fresh impressions that led away from the manor, recent and purposeful. "The murderer must have used this passage for their escape, crafting the scene to mislead us." "But why not flee outright?" asked my mind racing. "Why go to such extremes?" Poirot brushed his hands with a look of disgust. "To mislead Hastings, the secured window, the absent firearm, it's all a facade created to imply an outsider or a suicide, but the little gray cells, they penetrate such deceptions." As we retraced our steps, re-entering the library, Poirot carefully closed the concealed door, ensuring it showed no signs of our discovery. Back within the library's oak-paneled confines, Poirot retrieved the letter from his pocket and spread it out on the desk. His brow creased as he examined the written words, his fingers skimming the ink as if it might reveal its truths through touch alone. "Listen, Hastings," he stated, reading aloud with intentional clarity. "Charles, you have seized what does not belong to you. I will reclaim it or expose you. Signed, Arthur." He glanced up, his green eyes sharp as cut glass. "This is no mere threat, mon ami. It conveys a grievance deep and festered. Arthur believed Charles had betrayed him, perhaps over matters of inheritance or family reputation." I frowned, leaning in closer. "But Charles has commanded here for years. How could Arthur assert such a thing?" Poirot nodded, his fingers steepling beneath his chin. "Oui, and yet what if the taking alludes to something beyond simple possessions, a treachery perhaps, or a secret that Charles guards fiercely? We must consider all angles: financial disputes, personal rivalries, or even legitimacy questions. Within the Montague lineage, legitimacy?" I echoed, my curiosity ignited. "You mean there could be uncertainties about Charles's entitlement to the estate?" "It is one theory amidst many," Pooh replied, folding the letter with care. "The Montague bloodline, there might exist records, documents that could clarify this shadow. However, we must proceed with caution, Hastings. The truth is a fragile matter." That afternoon, as I roamed the manor's halls looking for respite from the suffocating atmosphere, I stumbled upon Reginald Thornton and Miss Eleanor in the conservatory. Their voices were subdued, but the tension between them was unmistakable. Reginald's hand hovered near her shoulder as if to comfort or restrain, while Miss Eleanor's gaze flickered away, her expression a tempest of unexpressed feelings. I lingered by the threshold, hesitant to intrude yet drawn to observe, until Reginald's voice rose sharply. "You must not speak of it, Eleanor, not to anyone." she recoiled, her voice quaking, but I cannot remain silent forever, it's too heavy to bear. Their discussion concluded abruptly as Reginald became aware of my presence, his face tightening. He strode past me without a word, leaving Miss Eleanor to gather herself in the dimly lit room. I resolved to tell Poirot this encounter, however enigmatic, carried significant weight. That same afternoon, as the fog thickened once more, the inspector arrived at the manor, his face alight with triumph. "We've got it, Poirot," he proclaimed, holding. In an attic, a corroded revolver was discovered. "One of my lads found it in the lake, buried in the mud not long ago. It seems to have been used," I stated. Poirot rose from his chair, his curiosity ignited. "Well done, Inspector. Do enlighten me on its exact location, please." "It was found near the exit of the passage," I replied, puffing with pride. "Partially buried, yet the caliber corresponds with the bullet lodged in Arthur's skull." Poirot scrutinized the firearm, his fingers deft on the flawed surface. "Indeed, it fits," he mused. "The murderer must have discarded it after escaping through that passage. But tell me, does this evidence clarify the culprit's identity or the motive behind the act?" His earlier enthusiasm began to wane. "Your insights are commendable, Poirot, but I assert it's the how that holds significance here." "Here is your gun, as straightforward as it appears," Poirot replied with a thin smile. "The how merely serves the why, mon ami. This revolver is just a means, it is the motive of its wielder that we must pursue." Later that evening, as the manor enveloped itself in an uneasy silence, Poirot beckoned me to his quarters. He paced before the window, hands clasped behind him, his small figure shadowed against the foggy glass. "Hastings," he began, turning to me, "the strands begin to interlace the passage, the letter, the revolver all point to a meticulously planned crime. The core of it revolves around Charles Montague and the secret he conceals." I settled into a chair, my curiosity ignited. "The secret related to the theft mentioned in the letter?" "Precisely," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "Arthur believed Charles had deeply wronged him, taking what did not belong to him. It could pertain to an inheritance, but perhaps there's something more profound, a betrayal of trust, a theft of honor, or a question of legitimacy regarding the Montague lineage." I frowned, contemplating. "Legitimacy? You suspect there's uncertainty regarding Charles's claim to the estate?" "It stands as one potential scenario," Poirot noted, his tone measured. "The letter is ambiguous, yet its fervor is unmistakable. Arthur felt deprived of something crucial, and his return threatened to unveil a concealed truth that Charles has safeguarded. We must investigate the past, Hastings. Let's seek out records and perhaps even the family's legal documents. The truth lies within the nuances." I nodded, though doubt remained. "But the guests and the staff they've known Charles for years. If something were amiss, wouldn't they have noticed?" "Ah, but have they genuinely known him?" Poirot countered. "Or merely the persona he projects? People see what they anticipate. A clever ruse can become indistinguishable from reality when maintained over time. We must delve beyond appearances." The following morning, as the household assembled for breakfast, a distinct tension filled the air. Charles suddenly stood, his face flushed with determination. "I've had enough of this," he announced unsteadily. "I'm departing for London this morning. Urgent matters require my attention." Poirot, seated at the table, exchanged a glance with someone who stepped forward with a gruff nod. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mr. Montague. Nobody departs from Ivy Manor until this matter is resolved," he declared with a resolute tone. Charles's eyes widened in disbelief, his fists tightening. This is absurd. I have obligations that require my attention. You can't confine me here like a detainee. Poirot's voice remained composed yet unwavering. Your hasty exit would cast suspicion upon you. It is in both your interest and ours for you to stay until we uncover the truth. Charles shot him a fierce look, his determination faltering. You believe I'm involved in Arthur's death? That's ridiculous. I only assert that the truth must be uncovered, Poirot replied, maintaining steady eye contact. To flee would only raise doubts. Stay, and allow us to vindicate you, provided your name can indeed be cleared. Charles hesitated before slumping back into his chair, his defiance fading. Fine, he mumbled, but I expect this to be resolved quickly. Poirot nodded slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. It shall be so. The net draws tighter, and soon we shall uncover the truth. As evening descended, I found Poirot by the lake, the fog lifting to unveil its smooth surface. He stood there, still, his gaze locked on the water, a solitary figure against the dimming light. The truth is close, mon ami, he murmured quietly, his voice imbued with a calm certainty. Very close indeed. I joined him, the tranquility of the moment belying the tempest that I anticipated was on the horizon. Chapter 6: The Drawing Room. Chapter 6: The Drawing Room Revelation. Poirot reveals the murderer. The drawing room of Ivy Manor served as a monument to a splendor now overshadowed by discomfort. Its velvet sofas and glittering chandelier glowed softly in the dim light of late afternoon. Yet beneath this facade of sophistication, tension simmered as stifling as the fog that had enveloped the estate for days. Hercule Poirot had gathered the guests and staff within this luxurious room, and they arrived, their expressions marked by both anxiety and curiosity. Colonel Hargreaves occupied a tall chair, his flushed face reflecting a blend of outrage and apprehension. Lady Penelope sat gracefully, her fingers gripping her pearls as her anxious gaze flitted around the room. Miss Llewellyn, pale and silent, stared into the fire, enveloped in a shroud of quiet despair. Charles Montague lingered by the window, his lean figure tense, while Reginald Thornton hovered beside him, his anxiety more visible than ever. Jenkins and Molly positioned themselves by the door, their stances rigid, as though anticipating an unpredictable impact. The inspector stood at the exit with crossed arms, his expression a mix of doubt and reluctant faith. Captain Hastings sat eagerly beside Poirot, my notebook opened on my lap. Poirot stood near the fireplace, his neat, compact frame radiating tranquility amid the brewing turmoil. He held a delicate cup of tea in his hand, its herbal aroma a subtle contrast to the charged ambience. After taking a sip, he set the cup down on the mantel with a purposeful gesture. "Precision, madam," began his voice with clarity and calmness. "We are convened here to illuminate the shadows that have descended upon this residence, the murder of Monsieur Arthur Montague. However, we must first disentangle the web of deceit that has intricately woven this sorrowful tale." He paused, his emerald eyes scanning the assembly, locking onto each pair of eyes with a penetrating intensity that seemed to strip away all falsehoods. "It commenced, as you are aware, with a theft, the disappearance of a silver cigarette case reported missing by Monsieur Charles Montague. What seemed trivial at first glance, as I frequently remind you, mon ami Hastings, is that it is often the smallest of details that reveal the deepest truths. This theft was not a simple error, it was a ruse orchestrated by Monsieur Charles to call me to Ivy Manor." Charles tightened his grip on the window frame, voice sharp with anxiety. A ruse, he echoed. I assure you, Poirot, it was a legitimate loss. Poirot raised a hand, quietly but assertively silencing him. No, monsieur, you dreaded your brother Arthur's return, did you not? His unexpected appearance confirmed your fears, as he bore with him a truth you wished to remain hidden. You hoped that my presence might either dissuade him or, if that failed, protect you from the fallout of his revelations. A wave of whispers flowed through the room as Lady Penelope leaned in closer, her voice a hushed gasp. Revelations? Oh, Mr. Poirot, do enlighten us about the secrets Arthur uncovered. Poirot's eyes shifted to her, a subtle smile gracing his lips. Patience, madam, all will soon be clarified. He stepped away from the fireplace, his movements purposeful as if retracing the very steps of the crime. Let us reconstruct that fateful evening. Arthur Montague returned to Ivy Manor under the cover of night, not through the main entrance, but instead via the hidden passageway we discovered in the library, a passage known to very few yet taken with intention. He confronted the murderer, and their argument escalated to deadly heights. A gunshot rang out, muffled by a cushion to obscure the sound, and Arthur collapsed lifelessly in that room. The assailant then escaped through the passage, discarding the revolver into the lake to eliminate the evidence. A figure grunted from his post by the door, his tone rough yet curious. That's the how of it, Poirot. Well played. I'll grant you the gun in the lake and the passage, it all lines up. But who was the one who pulled the trigger? That's what we all await to discover. Poirot inclined his head, his demeanor calm yet determined. Indeed, Inspector, but before we can identify the murderer, we need to unveil the motive behind this desperate act. He retrieved a letter from his pocket that had been hidden in the library, unfolding it with care. This, my friends, is the key. It reads, Charles, you have taken what wasn't yours. I will reclaim it or expose you. Signed by Arthur Montague. He held the letter aloft, his voice ascending with urgency. Quiet fervor. What did Arthur intend by this? What had been taken as an inheritance? One might think, but no, it runs deeper than that. He directed his attention towards Charles. His stare cutting like a knife. Monsieur, you are not the genuine Montague, are you? You are a pretender, a man who adopted the persona of the true Charles Montague long ago after he disappeared under most enigmatic circumstances. A sharp gasp reverberated in the room, sharp and collective. Charles's complexion sapped of color, his hands clutching the arms of his chair as if to steady himself against the surge of Poirot's words. That's preposterous, he faltered, his voice breaking. I am Charles Montague. I've resided here, managed this estate. No, Monsieur. Poirot interjected, his tone firm yet laced with compassion. The authentic Charles Montague vanished, and you stepped into his place, orchestrating a charade so convincing that even those nearest to you were fooled. But Arthur, the rightful heir, unveiled your deceit. He returned to reclaim his heritage or to reveal you to the public, and that, Monsieur, is the reason he had to die. Poirot paused, letting the gravity of his statements permeate the atmosphere. But who, you ask, would go to such lengths to safeguard such a secret? Let us examine each of you one by one, for in a crime of this magnitude all must be considered suspects until proven innocent. He first directed his gaze to Miss Eleanor, her pale countenance rising to meet his stare. Mademoiselle Eleanor, your history with Arthur was fraught with passion. You were once betrothed, and his reappearance reopened old wounds. One might speculate you harbored bitterness, perhaps even a wish for revenge. But no, your alibi is robust. You were in your room, as corroborated by Lady Penelope, who noted your restless movements throughout the night. Furthermore, you lacked the knowledge of the passage, a secret not divulged to you. The motives of the heart can be powerful, but here they do not lead to murder. Miss Elenina's shoulders sagged in relief, yet her eyes remained clouded with sorrow. Poirot's gaze transferred to Colonel Hargreaves, who adjusted in his seat, his mustache bristling. Colonel, your bravado and vague timeline ignited my suspicions. A person of your military credentials might possess the audacity to carry out such an act, yet your movements were accounted for. Jenkins observed. You in the billiard room and your physical limitations, the old war wound that impairs your gait, would have made navigating the steep pathways a nearly insurmountable task. No, Colonel, you did not slay Arthur. Montague Hargreaves huffed, a blend of relief and indignation crossing his features. Well, of course not. Ridiculous to presume. Next, Poirot shifted his focus to Lady Penelope, who tightened her grip on her pearls. Madam, your penchant for gossip and shifting narratives cast a cloud of doubt. You recounted footsteps and muffled sounds, yet your accounts were inconsistent. But upon careful examination, it's evident you were in the drawing room with Miss Elenina that evening, followed by your return to your room. Your motive seems to lean more toward curiosity rather than any intent to commit murder. You sought scandal, not violence. Lady Penelope's laughter was tinged with unease, her relief unmistakable. Oh, Mr. Poirot, she remarked, you truly have a knack for making one's heart race. Poirot shifted his focus to the servants. Jenkins, your dedication to this household is admirable, but your anxious demeanor and presence in the servants' hall place you far from the library. You heard the footsteps, true, but you did not step out. And Mademoiselle Molly, your keen observation captured much, yet your responsibilities confined you to the dining hall, cleaning. Neither of you possessed the opportunity or motive to commit this crime. Jenkins and Molly exchanged glances, their postures easing slightly. And so, Poirot continued, with a sharper tone, we arrive at the individual whose loyalty exceeds reason, whose actions hint at a frantic desire to safeguard a secret that is not his own. Reginald Thornton sprang to his feet, his slender frame quaking with outrage. This is absurd, Poirot. Charles is my cousin. I've known him since our childhood. How dare you accuse him of such an act? Poirot turned his gaze toward him, his eyes sharpening. Ah, Mr. Thornton, you profess a bond from childhood, yet the reality is far more complicated, is it not? You were aware of the true Charles Montague, yet this man, this impostor, is not the boy you grew up with. Yet your protection of him is fervent. Why is that? The little gray cells have been pondering this, and the answer does not dwell in your past with the legitimate Charles, but rather in a debt you owe to this false one. Reginald's expression soured, his hands balling into fists. A debt? What nonsense! It is not nonsense, Poirot interjected, his tone both calm and insistent. Years ago, when you may have been lost, perhaps in ruin or peril, this impostor appeared before you. He saved you, did he not? In a moment of crisis, a debt that was left unpaid, a life was spared, a secret kept. He pulled you from despair, and in exchange, you vowed your allegiance when he took on the identity of Charles Montague. You stood by him, not out of belief in his kinship, but because he offered you a second chance, a new life entwined in his deception. Reginald's breath quickened, his gaze shifting toward the impostor. You cannot possibly know that. But I can, Poirot asserted, stepping closer. The clues are whispering the truth. The letter in your quarters is vague but revealing, alluding to a past favor. Your unwavering defense of this Charles, despite the contradictions, indicates that a childhood friend would have perceived the anxious tells of a man encumbered by more than mere duty. You knew he was not the true Montague, yet you safeguarded his secret, not out of love for the real Montague, but for the man who rescued you. He took a brief pause before addressing a thought that had been occupying my mind. Then, Messamy, there was the intriguing event in the conservatory, which Menominee Hastings had overheard. Mr. Thornton urged Mademoiselle Eleanor to keep quiet, cautioning her to refrain from discussing it with anyone. I pondered what this event could be, a secret significant enough to warrant such a strict warning. It was indeed the reality of Charles's true identity, a truth that Mademoiselle Eleanor had started to intuit through her prior association with Arthur. Her engagement to Arthur provided her with a unique perspective on the Montague family, and perhaps she noticed inconsistencies in Charles's actions or stories throughout the years. Reginald, aware of her growing suspicions, feared she might unmask the deception and thus attempted to silence her, not through force, but through urgent pleading. Mademoiselle Eleanor's head lifted, her eyes wide with understanding, though she remained silent. Reginald's posture sagged further, his lack of words indicating his own acknowledgment. He turned to the room again, his voice calm as he wove the narrative toward its peak. The letter concealed in the library detailed a theft that involved more than just riches. It was about identity. The hidden passage used to create the scene and dispose of the firearm revealed a mind both clever and desperate, while the revolver retrieved from the lake by Inspector Japp's diligent team confirmed the killer's escape route. He nodded, his skepticism beginning to fade into hesitant admiration. The gun's a match, found exactly where the passage ends, but you're stating Thornton overheard our man. Poirot's gaze locked onto Reginald, who recoiled as if struck. We observe Inspector Monsieur Reginald Thornton, whose loyalty to the impostor defies logic. Notice his anxious habits and his presence near the library the night of the murder, as noted by Mademoiselle Molly. His zealous defense of his cousin indicates a man harboring many secrets. Reginald's fists tightened, his voice escalating in a frantic objection. I was safeguarding Charles, indeed, but I did not take Arthur's life. I swear this on my own existence. Poirot moved in closer, his voice quiet yet forceful, slicing through the man's protests like a precise tool. But you did, monsieur, you discharged that weapon at Arthur to silence him, to protect the secret you have shielded since the charade began. You were aware of the passage, perhaps uncovered it during your youth, a remnant of Ivy Manor's mysteries. On that evening, you trailed Arthur into the library, and when he made his claim, you reacted. You employed the cushion to soften the shot, then escaped through the passage, laying down misleading clues to distract us. Nonetheless, the little gray cells see through such tricks. Reginald's visage crumbled, his fortitude shattering like fragile glass. I had no choice, he murmured, his voice faltering as tears filled his eyes. Arthur would have destroyed everything. Charles, he saved me when no one else would. Years ago, I would have been dead, or far worse, without him. I owed him everything, my life, my position here. Arthur's return posed a threat to unravel it all, expose the deception, and leave me with nothing. I couldn't allow that to occur, not after all he did for me. Charles rose unsteadily, his voice a strained plea. Reginald, no, you didn't do this for me. I did, Reginald sobbed, collapsing into a chair, his hands shielding his face. I kept your secret from the start, since you adopted the name. I couldn't allow Arthur to destroy it. A shocked silence blanketed the room, thick and profound. Poirot stepped closer, his tone steady but compassionate. Reginald Thornton, you are under arrest for the murder of Arthur Montague, Come along now." As Reginald was escorted from the room, Charles sank back into his chair, his head cradled in his hands. "It's true," he murmured, his voice barely catching. "I am not Charles Montague. The real Charles disappeared years ago, lost for what I assumed was eternity. I took his place, created this life, but I never intended for anyone to perish." Poirot adjusted his tie with a flourish, his face reflecting serene contentment. "The truth surfaces as it must, monsieur, and with it, order is restored." The household lingered in a daze, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them like a tangible force. Outside, the fog had finally started to clear, the sun casting a tentative glow over the manor's grounds, as if signaling the conclusion of a long and cloaked chapter. Chapter 7, Order Restored, Justice Prevails. The storm that had raged through Ivy Manor had subsided, leaving behind a tranquility that felt almost sacred. Reginald Thornton, with his slender shoulders hunched under the burden of his confession, was escorted away in handcuffs by Inspector and his officers, the sound of metal a mournful echo in the manor's silent halls. Charles Montague, or the man who had assumed that identity, stood apart, his once self-assured manner shattered as the authorities interrogated him as his masquerade was unveiled for everyone to witness. The guests, having fulfilled their parts in this somber narrative, were ready to leave their actions a subtle counterbalance to the disclosures that had rocked the house to its core. Colonel Hargreaves grumbled as he loaded his bags, his once loud voice now reduced to a mutter. "Tedious business," he remarked, although the quiver in his hands revealed a deeper unease. Lady Penelope, ever loquacious, filled the atmosphere with anxious banter while she assembled her things, her gossip now tinged with a weary tone. "To think there was a fraud among us and a murder to boot. I'll have plenty to relay at the next soiree." Miss Elenina slipped away quietly, her countenance a faint veil of grief, her steps gentle on the gravel as she faded into the dissipating fog. Poirot and I found sanctuary in the garden. The brisk autumn breeze a relief after the suffocating strain within. The mist had started to clear, revealing the estate's grounds in tender detail, the ivy-covered walls, the barren trees, the lake now shimmering subtly under a hesitant sun. We settled on a stone bench and Poirot produced his ever-present tisane, sipping it thoughtfully as his keen eyes surveyed the landscape. "Ah, Hastings," he eventually said, his voice soft yet resonating. "In such instances, one witnesses the beauty of restored order, the truth it emerges from the disorder, does it not? Yet what a cost is incurred for its revelation." I nodded, my pen scratching across the pages of my notebook as I chronicled the last strands of the investigation. "You've done it yet again, Poirot. The way you penetrated everything is truly remarkable." Poirot's mustache quivered with a slight smile, although his gaze remained distant. "It is not merely the observation, Hastings, but the comprehension. The little gray cells discern the intricacies of the human spirit. Consider Reginald, his allegiance. It was an admirable quality distorted into a weapon by circumstance, and Charles, his dread of exposure. It compelled him to call for me. However, he could not anticipate the storm it would incite." I paused in my writing, taken aback by his perception. Reginald's fidelity. It was almost tragic, wasn't it, to take a life for a man who wasn't even who he professed to be? "Precisely," Poirot responded gently, setting his cup down with a delicate sound. "Loyalty. It serves as a double-edged sword. It unites individuals, yet when it blinds them to justice it morphs into a threat." Reginald perceived in this false Charles a rescuer, a debt to be settled at any cost. Arthur's return jeopardized that connection, hence he acted not out of hatred but a skewed affection, and you deciphered it from those psychological hints, I remarked, my admiration growing. His anxious habits, Charles's evasiveness, it's remarkable how you interpret them." Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "Gesture of modest dismissal. It represents merely the application of method, Hastings, in the passage of the letter. The revolver, these were only instruments, it was the intellect behind them that resonated." The loudest Reginald's anxiety, Charles's fear, they unlocked the door to this enigma. I paused, then posed the question that had been bothering me. But Poirot, why did Arthur endure the impostor for so long? If he recognized Charles as a fraud, why delay revealing him? Poirot's eyes sparkled with comprehension. Ah, mon ami, that is indeed the question of the heart. Arthur was a man riddled with flaws. Debt, scandals, a life on the precipice. The impostor offered Arthur a comfortable lifestyle, possibly an allowance to keep him placated, and Arthur dreaded the turmoil that exposure would unleash not only upon himself but also the estate, the family reputation. It was a fragile equilibrium, one that sustained until Arthur's situation altered, forcing him to take action. So it was a matter of convenience. I suggested. Convenience, yes, but also driven by fear. Poirot responded. Arthur recognized that to unmask the impostor would bring destruction upon him. The impostor had entwined himself into the essence of Ivy Manor, and extricating him would unravel everything. Only when Arthur concluded he had no alternative, perhaps a debt too insurmountable, a threat too immediate, did he seek to reclaim what was his. I shut my notebook. The story at its end. You are a wonder, Poirot, truly. After all this, what do you say to a getaway somewhere warm, perhaps devoid of mysteries to vex us? Poirot's smile broadened, a spark in his eye, though his gaze drifted toward the horizon. A tempting idea, mon ami, but the world is never lacking in enigmas. There will always be another lurking to challenge the little gray cells. For now, let us treasure this tranquil moment as we prepare to leave. Ivy Manor remained still behind us, its secrets unveiled, its splendor softened by the illumination of truth. The lake sparkled like a polished mirror, capturing the sky's tentative blue, and Poirot hummed a soft tune, a melody of satisfaction. I observed his step lightened by the fulfillment of justice served. We departed from the manor, the mist of deceit finally cleared, ready for whatever awaited us as the fog dissipated from Ivy Manor. Hercule stands victorious, his little gray cells having navigated through a maze of lies and loyalty. The truth has come to light. Charles Montague was an impostor, a person who had taken on the identity of the genuine heir years ago after the real Charles disappeared. His devoted secretary Reginald Thornton, motivated by a debt of gratitude from a past rescue, killed Arthur Montague to safeguard the secret binding them. Poirot's unwavering quest for order dismantled the deception, revealing the murderer and the deceiver at the center of the estate. Are revealed through hints such as an obscured letter, a clandestine passage, and a revolver discarded in the lake. As justice triumphs, this narrative offers a disturbing contemplation on the cost of fidelity and the shadows created by concealed realities. We aspire that this story has held your interest. Did you sense that Thornton's loyalty masked a sinister agenda? Share your thoughts below. If Hercule Poirot and the enigma of Ivy Manor have captured your imagination, kindly like this episode and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for additional mysteries. Support our narrative journey by either becoming a member or by contributing with a super thanks, available under this video or through our Buy Me a Coffee page, link in the description. Thank you for being part of our community, and until we embark on our next nocturnal journey, may your evenings overflow with wonder and your days be filled with clarity.